Well, greetings to you. I'd like to return to the subject of the Russian Federation's engagement with the Ukraine at the moment, because a few more things have come to light, and I think what we need is an update. And we're not getting any updates, of course, from mainstream media or our own government, because any dissent against this war, any dissent the way it's being handled, has been just got out of the way. You're not allowed to say anything. You're not allowed to take a view. It's got to be the view of Washington, which comes via London, and that's it, end of. And that's picked up with mainstream media, and that's the way they run with it. But of course, as you know, you don't trust mainstream media. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this clip. You don't get your information from the BBC. You'd be mad to, because everything you get is lies, lie after lie. But let me just bring you up to speed a little bit, if I may. First of all, what's come out quite recently, and that was that Angela Merkel has admitted that they did not enter the Minsk agreement in good faith, not to expand NATO eastwards. They didn't enter that in good faith. That's been admitted. She's admitted that. This isn't a conspiracy theory, all right? This she has admitted, and the West has admitted. It was to gain time from 2014 to arm the Ukraine as the cat's paw of the neocons in Washington in order to find a way of disrupting the Russian Federation and eventually regime change and breaking up the Federation, as per the Wolfowitz Doctrine of 1991. This was all written down many years ago after the demise of the Soviet Union. What do we do with Russia after the demise of the Soviet Union? And the answer was, of course, with the Washington neocons, let's pretend it hasn't happened. Let's pretend that the Soviet Union is still there and treat Russia in much the same way. And that's what's been going on. And of course, NATO, we're Washington sponsored. NATO really is just a nickname for Washington neocons, has gone on pushing up through the Baltic and pushing up to the east. And I wrote an article in 2016, it's on my website, 2016, that's how long ago I wrote it, that what we were dealing with here was trying to get the Ukraine into a situation where it would be a sort of a dagger at the heart of Russia, with boots on the ground, missiles and all the rest of the paraphernalia that NATO carries, much closer to the heart of Russia. Now, at this point, if you're a blue and yellow flag waver, don't get hysterical. I am not pro-Russian. I'm not pro-Ukrainian. I'm simply telling you, as a geopolitical military strategist, what the situation is so you can make up your own mind. So this has already been planned. This has been planned since 2014 in the Ukraine. And my article of 2016 is on my website, and you can find it. I'm not being smart after the event. I told you this was happening, and this would happen. So, where are we? We have the Ukraine, which has been used as a cat's paw. And, of course, the Ukrainian army is taking, not that you're going to get this on mainstream media, it's taking one hell of a battering from the Russians after the Russians made their initial mistake. And the initial mistake was thinking that they could go in and protect the ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine, and the Donbass region, and then doing that to protect them would then get NATO around the table, the Americans around the table, and we could hammer out some kind of peace deal, some sort of permanent peace deal after the collapse of the Minsk agreement. That's not happening because the Americans are totally and utterly certain that the best thing that to be done is for them to destroy the Russian Federation, break up the Russian Federation using the Ukraine. And this is what's going on. And very slowly, I think the Ukrainians are beginning to realise that they've been used. Not Zelensky and his government, but the ordinary Ukrainian people and Ukrainian soldiers. But we'll see. We mustn't peep into chapter 2. Now, we keep on getting from our defence correspondents in the mainstream media who know nothing about these matters. They're not soldiers, they're not strategists, they don't know anything, they're just actually reading out the party line. And that includes the Daily Telegraph, everybody else, all these people who have no idea about these subjects at all. They're saying, oh, if we go on and on and on pushing weaponry and money into the Ukraine, eventually they'll win. Well, they won't. You can't beat Russia on its own doorstep. It's not going to happen. And now that the Russians are convinced that the West is acting and has been acting in bad faith, which is fairly obvious to see if you see the NATO encroachment through the Baltic and Romania and Poland and so on and so forth. Quite easy to see. The Russians are taking the view there's nothing we can do. The Americans are determined not to come to the negotiating table. Their lackeys, like the British Foreign Office and the British politicians, who go along with anything, absolutely anything that Washington says or does, whether it's Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, so on and so forth. We've gone on and on and on with it. I don't quite know why that should be, but we do. So it's war after war after war, permanent war. You'd think we'd have learnt something, possibly since Korea, or at least Vietnam, that nobody gets anything out of this. But I've said this before. It's a waste of time, waste of money, and it's a waste of young lives and civilian lives, not just soldiers now, of course. Now, all this about let's put military hardware. Let's put more military hardware into the Ukraine and more money. Now, only people who have no military knowledge are suggesting this. And I include some of the senior command structure in America, who's, seen them, haven't you? The American generals, 4-star generals, all these medals. They've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of medals, of course, which, of course, that comes up with the rations, it seems, in the American army. Leaving that aside, let's just look about what's supposed to be going in. We're looking at the Bradley, which is an armoured vehicle, armoured carrier vehicle, the Challenger 2 tank, the Abrams tank, perhaps, which is the American tank, the Leopard tank, which is a good tank, diesel-driven, so on and so forth. These tanks, the tanks, these armoured carriers, they're going to turn the tide. These are going to pivot the situation. These are going to make them war-winning machines. Well, they're not. First of all, you need to train them, train people on them. But modern equipment's very complicated. You've got gun systems, aiming systems. You've got ammunition systems. You've got backup systems like REME for the Challenger, Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. They go wrong. They have to be put together again. You need workshops. You need frontline workshops. You need tank commanders. You need supporting infantry with their weapons, supporting artillery with very sophisticated equipment. All this is extremely sophisticated, and it's very difficult to train on, and it takes a long time to train. You can't just suddenly put soldiers in uniform, give them a tin hat and a gun and hope it's going to be all right on the night. Modern warfare doesn't work like that. And of course, nobody's even talking about air power. It's very, very difficult to deploy armour of any sort, even if it's good armour and you're in control and you're highly trained, if you don't have air superiority. And the Germans found that out, of course, in the Falaise Gap and in Normandy, how difficult that is. And they fought very well, and they were a very disciplined and experienced army. The Ukrainian army isn't like that. Very brave. I'm not saying they're not brave. What I'm suggesting is they are not of the mettle of the German army in 1943, 44, 45. And come to that, the Russian army will not be as good as they were in 1943, 1944 and 1945, because the only thing, you can train as much as you like, the only thing that really works with armies is battlefield experience, and they get better and better. And it doesn't matter which army you are, broadly speaking, you get better and better, or maybe you give up and run away. They're the two options. So the British would be no different. Americans no difference. If you remember the drubbing we got from when Rommel turned up in the desert with a highly trained army and very effective tanks, it took us a long time to turn that round, sort that one out, and fight the Battle of Alamein under Montgomery, and then move back again. And of course, we pushed the Africa Corps right back into the Western Desert. Right up almost to the seaboard. There we had Operation Torch. The Americans came in very undertrained, as they would be, very inexperienced, not their fault. Not suggesting they weren't brave, but they just weren't on the ball. How could they be when it was their first experience of combat in that form, armoured warfare? And they met the Germans in the Kasserine Pass and got a right drubbing. These things happen. So it takes time. And you need officers to be trained. It takes time to train officers and senior NCOs. It takes time and experience. You can't bring that in overnight. The Ukrainians can't do anything about their losses. They can't replace their losses because they haven't got time to train anybody. They've got no time to train on armoured, on the Patriot missiles coming out. There's a lot of training, a lot of reserves. And if you're going to move armour, then of course you need infantry to work with armour, artillery. It's very complicated. The modern battlefield is very complicated. When I say the modern battlefield, I'm talking about since 1944 and 45, when battlefields became modern. And of course, as I say again, I re-emphasise air power. You need all these things. So this business about that's propagated by our Western media, which comes straight from Washington, they just read out the press releases. Politicians, our politicians who don't know anything about it, American politicians don't know anything about it, German politicians, French politicians don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about it. They're just your typical ignorant, stupid politician, and they're all the same. And I've said that before as well. But you know that. You know that, don't you? You know they're all stupid. So we've got this situation that we're going to go on and on and on till the last Ukrainian dies. And then what happens when Russia eventually, unless there's a massive pivot and a massive change of circumstance, will eventually win this bloody and stupid and unnecessary war. And then, of course, the Russians will dictate terms, almost certainly. And they will say, we want the Minsk agreement, but we go back. You've got to mean it this time. And it's got to be enforced. And we will enforce it. The Russian army will enforce it. And that's natural in the victor. The victor calls the shots. So these are the sort of things that we need to think about. And the logistics. So the Americans, what are the West going to do? How do they put people in theatre, in the war theatre? It's a land war. It's on Russia's, but the logistics for the Russians are very easy. It's just a few hundreds of miles, their logistics. We'll be trying to get material, war material and men from the other side of the Atlantic. Even if there was a civilian will, even if there was an electoral will to fight the Russians, which I don't believe to be the case. It might be true in Washington. It might be true, but I don't think it's true of the average American who wants to fight Russia. Then we have the nuclear situation coming into play. Now, the Russians have made it quite clear since the very beginning of nuclear, going back to 1945, a nuclear standoff, the Mexican standoff, mutual assured destruction, that the Russians will not be the first users of nuclear weapons. They will only use them in a retaliatory basis. But if the West don't use tactical nuclear weapons, eventually they're going to lose. And so this makes it even more dangerous. And funnily enough, in the last 2 years, we've seen people walking around with face masks, jabbed, boosted, terrified of COVID, which of course now we all know is nothing to be terrified at all. It's just a lot of silly nonsense, but that's another subject. Worried about COVID, who don't seem to be the same worry about the potential of standing on the brink of a nuclear war. Are we mad? Are we mad? COVID's not a problem. Nuclear war is a very serious problem. You can't be jabbed against a nuclear war. You can't wear a mask to protect yourself in a nuclear war. So what we need is peace, and we need a peace agreement, and we need it soon. And of course, if you had been allowed, and you're not allowed, it's been blanked out, to listen to Putin's speeches for the last 2 months, he's saying, let's sit round a table and let's discuss what we can do about this. We don't want this war. None of the people, the Russian people, the Ukrainian people, Western Europe people, the average American, they don't want this war. It's expensive. It's on borrowed money too, by the way. The billions we put in are better spent at home. I think we'd all agree with that, wouldn't we? We also don't know where the money's going. It's unaudited. Some of it's funneled back, of course, to the manufacturers of arms back in North America. So all these things are happening. All these things are happening. And we must get round a table, if we can, sooner rather than later, before the big Russian offensive puts over the frozen ground, and come to some sort of pragmatic and sensible realpolitik decision. Or this is just going to get worse and worse. I will continue to keep you informed. I will continue to keep you informed because you're simply not getting the truth from mainstream media or the idiots who pretend that they're defence correspondents in the national press. There's no John Keegans, there's no Claire Hollingworths, no people who really knew their stuff. Nowadays, you just get some idiot who was covering something else the other day and don't know anything about defence or the implications of this and geopolitical strategy. I will get back to you as these things develop, and my goodness me, I think you'll find they're going to develop quite quickly and quite soon. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based. And I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.